Hello and welcome. My name is Olivia Hupp, and on behalf of Youth Time International Movement, thank you for joining us. This video is a continuation of our current webinar series, Future Skills for Workplace Sustainability. If you've missed any of our previous episodes, not to worry, they're all on our YouTube channel under playlists, and while you're there, don't forget to subscribe so you can keep up with all of our future videos. Today's webinar is about work-life balance with our expert speaker, Dr. Julia Richardson. She is an award-winning lecturer and researcher out of Curtin University in Perth, Australia, as well as co-author of the book An Intelligent Career, Your Work and Your Life. So without wasting any more time, let's get started.
Okay, there we are. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. I'm delighted to be here.
All right. Yes, I'm glad we could do this, especially in these current times. I'm thrilled this is working.
Absolutely.
All right. So for anyone watching, let's go over a quick overview of what we're going to do today. So we have a short presentation from Julia regarding work-life balance, the fundamentals, what it is, bad habits, good habits, all this good stuff. And then we're going to have a Q&A interview discussion session where we highly encourage you to ask your questions, get involved, all that good stuff. So before we get started, Julia, will you give us just an overview to your research, what you do, and how you're
Sure. Well, I'm very fortunate. I am a university professor at Curtin University in Western Australia in Perth, and I'm head of the School of Management and Marketing. And one of my areas of great interest is what I would call life balance, and particularly getting an understanding of how we achieve that life balance and the impact of not having work-life balance, the impact on our personal well-being and also our professional performance, and also looking at strategies of how we might achieve work-life balance, both for ourselves as individuals, but also if we're in a leadership position, perhaps say as a manager, as a parent, as a spouse, or even as a friend. How can we help each other to achieve that all-important work-life balance? And also looking at how approaches to work-life balance are changing, particularly in these challenging times of the COVID epidemic.
Absolutely. Yep. I think it's vital information that we're all excited to learn about.
It is.
All right. So on that note, let me share your presentation. Hold on just one second. Let me go find it.
Yep.
Technical difficulties. Give me just 1 second. Here we go. It's not without its difficulties.
Of course, it never is. Just so I'm clear, Olivia, I could talk about this forever. So how long would you like me to talk for?
I think as long as the presentation's 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, that's fine with me. I could talk for days about this, but I'd like to get some questions also from our audience.
Absolutely. Yes, this important stuff for sure. All right, so let's share this. Okay. And play. And so I'll just let you know when I want you to change the slide, Olivia. Okay. Perfect.
So away we go then. So I'm going to talk about life balance, dream or reality. And I think what's interesting, we're all very familiar with the term work-life balance, but in some respects, I think I'd rather refer to it as what we would call life balance. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about this notion of work-life balance or life balance, and I'm going to consider about, is it really something that any of us can achieve? Can we achieve it throughout our careers or perhaps at different points during our careers? Okay, next slide, Olivia, please. Okay, so I guess one of the challenges when we think about work-life balance. In a way, there's this underlying assumption that I would like to challenge. So it assumes that actually work is a separate thing from our lives, where we know for the majority of us, in fact, work is very much a part of our lives as a whole. So separating work from life can somehow be problematic conceptually, I think, and also practically, because we have to acknowledge that work is an integral part of many of our lives. It's very much part of our identities. Oftentimes when we meet new people, one of the common questions we ask them is, what do you do? Or what have you done? If you're a retiree, what did you used to do? Where do you work? And what is your particular profession? So I would like to think of work as very much part of our lives. And that being the case, how can we manage our work roles and responsibilities so they support what I would call life balance? Okay, let's go to the next slide, Olivia. Okay, click. There we are. So this is what I'm going to talk about today, the extent to which achieving that life balance is a dream or a reality. And again, I would prefer not to think in terms of opposites. I'd like to move away from this dichotomous approach, because I think absolutely achieving life balance, it can be a reality for the majority of us, but sometimes it might feel rather difficult to achieve on a consistent basis. So it may well be that during your professional career, perhaps at early stages, it might be a little bit more challenging to achieve that life balance, whereas at a later or mid-career stage, they may be much more within our reach. Alternatively, it might be that at some parts of the year, when you have a very busy period in the year, achieving that life balance may be a little bit more challenging, where at other times it may actually be much more within our reach. For example, during the summer period, perhaps in Europe, it might be a little bit more achievable to have that life balance, whereas perhaps during perhaps the spring and oftentimes during the winter months, it might feel a little bit more challenging. So again, I think it's important to think less about a dichotomy, opposites, is it a dream or a reality, and think about it in a more holistic way, that it might ebb and flow. So our opportunities to achieve that work balance may ebb and flow according to the time of year, according to the nature of our business, our profession, or our industry, and also according to our particular career stage. Okay, next slide, Olivia. So what I would like to say is how work-life balance is an extremely popular topic. We often see it in many media articles. We hear about reporters writing about it. It's often the subject of many discussions on TV. And it was really interesting that whenever I'm doing a talk such as this, what a popular topic it is, and it tends to be of interest to people from all walks of life, from all cultures, and at all different stages. And indeed, if you just do a very quick Google search on work-life balance, as I did in a popular online retailer of books, when I did a search on work-life balance, I came up with over 1,000 results, and that was just searching on books. So over 1,000 books just on this topic of work-life balance. And then we know that there are many other media through which you can explore balance. Even if you do a search on Facebook or wherever, LinkedIn, and just pop in that term, or a Google search, just pop in that term work-life balance, and you'll just see how many hits you get. And amongst the ones that I got, this kind of amused me. So here we can see a 2-year-old's guide to work-life balance. I wonder what that book entails. Is it really the case that we're looking at work-life balance even when we're just 2 years old? And what's also interesting is that it's a popular topic amongst all professionals, whether you're a politician, whether you're in human resource management, small business owner, whether no matter what industry you're in, whether it's the legal profession, mining, retail, or whatever, virtually everybody has an interest in work-life balance and the impact on our individual well-being as well as on our work performance. I think it's very important. And what's really interesting is that recent research, in fact, research over the past 5 years has shown that among young people starting out their careers, what really has a very strong impact on the kind of profession they choose and the organisation they're looking to work for is that many hold work-life balance and opportunities for work-life balance to be extremely important. So, for example, they're much more likely to choose an organisation, an employer, that is going to support their work-life balance than an organisation that's going to be less supportive. So, for example, I did a study very recently looking at the accounting profession. And whilst many young up-and-coming accountants were very concerned to go and work for what we would call the big four accounting firms, one of the things that was putting them off going to work for such a firm was they were very worried about opportunities for work-life balance. So we could see then that this criteria of the achievability of work-life balance for these young accountants was very, very important. And I do think that that's something that employers and managers and all leaders need to take into consideration, the extent to which they're going to support opportunities for work-life balance for all their employees. Thanks, Olivia. Let's go to the next slide. So I think the most important thing when we're looking at strategies for achieving work-life balance is to think about how do you define work-life balance. So what does work-life balance feel like and look like to you? So, for example, is it having an equal measure of opportunities in your personal life and then your commitment to your professional life? So does it look something like this? Is it a balance? Is it about equal measure? Alternatively, let's look at the next one. Might life balance look something like this to you? So you can see here that the one definition might well be that somebody who had a feeling of life balance if they felt that they could spend a lot more time with their friends and ensuring that they are staying healthy and well, a little bit perhaps on their career, perhaps a little bit less on their career, and perhaps a tiny bit less on their family. So this person's definition of work-life balance or life balance looks quite different from that first picture, doesn't it? Where actually for them, they would be spending much more time with their friends, significant amount of time with on their health, career a little bit less, and then even less on their family. So you can see here that what constitutes life balance is very much an individual issue. Let's look at the next definition, Olivia. So let's look at this one. Now we can see here that this person has a much more complicated, complex understanding definition of life balance. So this person would be engaged in many different opportunities. So you can see the physical there, you can see the social, which may look at family and friends and their professional network. They may actually be devoting a lot of time to, for example, spiritual activities involved in their religious pursuits and so forth. So I think the most important thing to start when we start out in defining our strategies to achieve life balance is to say, well, what would life balance look like and feel like for you? Is it going to be 50-50, or is it going to be measured across a number of different dimensions in your life? Okay, let's go to the next slide. So I think oftentimes we can be on the receiving end of some rather unhelpful advice with regard to our how to achieve our work-life balance. And let's look at this. And I think this is something that we often hear. Well, when you receive the sage advice, you just got to make time. But here's the thing about time. You can't make time. There are 24 hours in a day. There are 7 days in a week. That's it. 365 days in a year. So it's actually not possible to add more hours to your day, to add more minutes to your hours. So the key thing is not about making time, it's about looking at the time that you have available, and it's really about thinking, how am I going to use the time that I have available to me? And within that, it may well be that you make time for certain activities over others, but overall you cannot increase the amount of time overall that you have. So that's rather unhelpful advice. So let's now turn our focus now to actually, how do we want to make use of the time that we have? Next slide, please, Olivia. So I think this is a very interesting quote about management of your time from Carl Sandburg. Time is the coin of your life. It is the only coin you have, and only you can determine how it will be spent. Be careful lest you let other people spend it for you. So let's look at this a little bit more carefully. Let's unpack it. So the point I think that we're making here is you have to take control of your time, about how you're going to spend your time and with whom you are going to spend it. Here it says only you can determine how it will be spent. I think that's in part true, but I also think that it is incumbent upon us to work with others to ensure that we have that life balance. So, for example, you may want to speak with your managers, with your leaders, about how you can ensure that you get that all-important life balance, and also working with colleagues. So it's not just an individual endeavour. I think ultimately we do have to take charge. We have to take ownership of our careers and our work-life balance, but it also means working effectively with others. But what's very important is not to let other people spend your time for you and dominate how you are actually spending your time. It's about working with others, but also it's about taking ownership and responsibility for arranging your life balance. Next slide, please, Olivia. Okay, so strategies for achieving life balance. First of all, taking ownership. So it's going back to that earlier slide, and it's about thinking, how do you define life balance? What will life balance feel like? What's it look like for you right now? Would you be satisfied, for example, with 60% of your time being devoted to your professional life and the remaining 40% being devoted to non-work activities, families, friends, religious activities, and so forth? Or, for example, would life balance feel more like 40% with regard to your professional work, or even 80%, if 80% devoting 80% of your time to your professional life, and then the 20% to other dimensions of your life? If that feels fine for you, then you have to work around your own definition of life balance. Let's look at the next point, Olivia. So the next one is, do you have, so it's about what I would call taking stock. So it's thinking, okay, do I have life balance right now? How much time am I spending at work? Am I spending a lot of time when I get home, having left the office, or certainly now that we're all in a lockdown, are you really switching off from work? You know, at 6 o'clock in the evening and you have your dinner, are you returning to your computer screen and continuing with your work? Is that necessarily something you really want to do like right now? So it's about doing an audit, let's call it, of your current life balance status. Maybe keeping a check on it in terms of your hours over a period of a few weeks, and then reevaluating whether or not you've got that life balance. Okay, number 3, Olivia. So now the next is, do you actually want life balance? Is it something that's very important to you? And if so, why do you want it? What are you going to do with it once you have achieved it? So it's being very clear, if you really want to achieve life balance, very much like life in general, you have to make a commitment to achieving it and perhaps putting some strategies in place. Next one, please, Olivia. Okay, now let's imagine that you're in a situation that you actually don't have life balance. You're feeling a little bit uncomfortable in how you are spending your time. Perhaps let's assume that you feel that you're spending far too much time on work activities versus friendships or religious activities, or perhaps spending time with your family or other hobbies. So, for example, is it an issue of time? Is it an issue of resources? Is it an issue of your own personal energy, your lack of energy? So, for example, by the time you finish work, you simply don't have the energy, or you don't have the time to spend with family and friends or on your hobbies. Is it an emotional issue? For example, oftentimes in an organization, it may well be that if we feel fearful that we are going to lose our jobs, if we're fearful of our managers, of our colleagues or our leaders, it may well be that we're fearful of asking to have reduced work hours. We're fearful perhaps of saying no when we're being asked to work extra or to stay back late. So we have to look at the underlying causes of your lack of work-life balance. Could it be that you're simply not making the effort to have a conversation with your manager? Or perhaps it's you're not actually creating some space to spend time with family and friends and on your hobbies. Next one, Olivia. And I think that requires some important reflective work. Now, the next question, this seems like an odd question. What are you actually getting out of your lack of work-life balance? Research has shown that, for example, that for many people who complain or they feel very uncomfortable with their lack of life balance, in some respects, there's actually some reward for lack of life balance. So let's imagine you're in a situation where you're working very long hours. Let's look at some of the things that you might be getting out of those long work hours. Next one, Olivia. So it could well be, for example, when you're spending a lot of time at work, you're working long hours in the office, or perhaps now you're restricted to working from home and you still find yourself working at 10 o'clock in the evening. So in some instances, that can actually give you positive recognition from your colleagues and from your manager, from your leader in your profession. Oh, you know, John, he works really long hours. He's always responding to emails. He responds to emails early in the morning and very late at night. And in some instances, that positive recognition, it can be a source of reward for us. For example, it may well be that you feel that it's going to provide you with more opportunities for promotion, positive recognition from our colleagues, positive recognition from our clients. So it can actually be a positive source of recognition. It's easy to get sucked into that, I think. Let's have a look at the next one. Reward. In some instance, for example, if you work very long hours, it may well be that your productivity increases. So maybe that's an opportunity to have a bonus or a promotion or some other reward. It could be that you get poached by another organization, or you get very positive appraisals from your clients and your colleagues. So it could be actually those working late hours or early morning hours, working on a weekend. It's actually providing you with some reward. Let's look at the next thing. Avoidance. Now, this is a really interesting one, because oftentimes, for example, if you're working very late hours, you're working all weekend, maybe that's an opportunity, for example, to avoid doing chores in the house. Are you saying that you have to work late to avoid doing those all important chores in the house? Maybe you simply don't want to catch up with your friends. Maybe it's you have a sense of loneliness, particularly, for example, if you've moved to a new city, you've moved to a new town, and so you continue to work and work and work to avoid that sense of loneliness, because you feel that in your personal time you actually don't have anything else to do. You don't have any hobbies. You don't have any personal interests. What else? Another thing that you could get out is that feeling in control, feeling busy, feeling important. We often hear people say, well, you know, I can't take a holiday because I'm far too busy, or I'm a very important person in this organization. I can't leave my clients. It gives you that feeling, I think, of being indispensable, or a very, very busy person who simply can't take the time off, you know, over a weekend, that I've got to be consistently switched on at work and responding to my clients or my colleagues, simply because it gives me that sense of recognition, reward, perhaps even avoidance, feeling in control, busy, important at work. So I think that requires some real honesty when you're looking at why you have that lack of life balance. Okay, so now let's look at some strategies. We've just got 4 more slides now. So we have to think some of the strategies. So for some people, let's call them segmenters and integrators. So I think it's important, you don't necessarily have to be a segmentor or an integrator. You could be a combination of the two. So if you prefer segmentation, that's somebody who would prefer to have very clear boundaries between their work and their non-work activities. So this would be somebody, for example, who would feel very uncomfortable in bringing work home. This would be somebody who would be struggling right now, having to work from home during the pandemic. They have to have a very clear line between their work and their non-work activities. They may have their hobbies, which are very separate from their friends and their family, and then work also operates in a very distinct time period. And oftentimes people would feel that they don't have work-life balance, for example, when they're required to work from home, you know, in their own living room or in a home office. They feel very uncomfortable with that. Or it might be a situation where, for example, their work starts to impose on their family life. That would make them feel very uncomfortable. So if you're what we would call a segmenter, it would be up to you to craft very clear boundaries between work and non-work activities. Let's look at the next one. So an integrator, or somebody who prefers integration, that would be somebody, for example, who actually doesn't mind doing some work, perhaps at home. This would be somebody who would actually rather enjoy working from home. They wouldn't mind so much if their boss calls them after hours or even on a weekend, but a segmenter would be very upset over that. So if I'm a leader and I have employees who are integrators, I may feel quite comfortable in calling them after hours, but if I had an employee who was a segmenter, then I would know that it would be very important not to call them after hours, because that would be perceived as an imposition. So again, it's about understanding yourself. Am I an integrator or a segmenter? But also if you're a leader or a manager, then recognizing when somebody, one of your employees, is either a segmenter or an integrator. Alternatively, next slide, please, Olivia. You could have somebody who is what I would call an intersegmenter. So that might be, for example, during some parts of the year, they don't mind their work crossing over into their personal life, but then in other parts of the year, they'd actually want to be very distinct and very separate. It might well be that they enjoy their family and friends coming together, perhaps their religious activities, all are shared with family and friends. But then they want their workplace separate from that. So it's about deciding whether or not you're an integrator, you're a segmenter, or perhaps you're a bit of both, and looking at the boundaries you like to draw between different areas of your life. And then last couple of slides, I think it's very important. We often hear, in fact, I was discussing this with somebody a very short time ago, and they were talking about technology, and they were talking about how technology has taken over our lives and it's actually reduced opportunities for life balance. But I think it's important to note here that it's actually not technology that is doing this. The point is that we have to control and be mindful about how we use technology. Ultimately, technology is simply a vehicle. Yes, it could mean that we are more accessible, but I do think that we have to take control over how we are using technology to ensure that we use it to facilitate life balance rather than to go against or prevent life balance. And finally, the last slide, please, Olivia, is how life balance is actually everybody's business. What do we have when we have life balance? Well, we certainly know that the more somebody perceives themselves to have life balance, the more job satisfaction they have. So we can actually increase his job performance rather than reducing job performance. It also has reduced absenteeism. You have a much better sense of emotional well-being as well as physical well-being. We know that people who suffer from a lack of life balance also tend to struggle with family relationships, particularly between spouses. And also it can have a lack of life balance can have a detrimental impact on friendships and opportunities to engage in religious activities. we also know that it has a negative impact on what I would call our career sustainability. And this is why I think ensuring that we all have life balance is actually everybody's business. Really, it's a win-win for everybody, for both the individual as well as for the employer and the client and the colleague. Thanks, Olivia. Very happy to take any questions now.
Yes, thank you very much. That was very, very informative. I feel like I've learned quite a bit about how to be more mindful about work and life and really how to create a better balance. I think it's great.
Yeah.
All right. So as I said earlier, this is your time to ask any questions you could have. And let me stop sharing my screen now. Yes. Ask any questions you have, get involved, anything like this. But I have a couple of questions to start, if you don't mind. So first of all, it seems like wanting a true work-life balance or wanting a true life balance, as you mentioned, is kind of tied to this idea of a lack of ambition. So especially in recent graduates or young professionals, new professionals who are trying to kind of prove themselves or get ahead, this idea of if I work more hours, I get a promotion, I might get a higher salary. What would you say to those people?
Well, I think that would be a very problematic, narrow-minded way to view it if I had a manager who was like that. But I think that's the reality, Olivia. I think the important thing is to demonstrate to your employer that actually having that life balance, that means that you are far better placed. You're going to be more committed to your organization. It's actually going to increase your work performance. We know, I think it's really interesting, when you're tired, all you can be is tired, right? Innovative people aren't necessarily tired people. When you're tired, that's kind of all you are, right? So if you have that life balance, if you have that emotional and psychological well-being, actually that's going to have a positive impact on your career trajectory rather than a negative impact on your career trajectory. I think it's important as well about how you negotiate that with your employer and with your clients. And I think it's important how you frame it. So yes, life balance is very important to me. I'm a very committed person and I will go up that extra mile as and when necessary. However, I think it's also important for you to know that, having life balance is actually going to make you a much more committed and high performance employee.
Absolutely. So it sounds like balance in everything.
Balance. And that also that balance wanting life balance, and I think this is an important point to make, wanting life balance does not mean that you're going to be any less committed to your profession at all. It actually means I'm taking care of myself so that I can be a high performing employee.
Absolutely. So how would you say employers or clients or these kinds of external factors should encourage a life balance or a work-life balance with either coworkers or people that are in charge of this kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it's important. I think it's very important for what I would call walking the talk. So if I just give an example of myself, so for example, I wouldn't send emails to my colleagues in my school before the beginning of the working day, right? So I wouldn't send an email unless it's an absolute emergency. I wouldn't send it what I would call after hours, after working hours. So I wouldn't be sending an email at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, because I think there's a problem with that, because even if I send it, and even if I say in my email, I don't expect you to respond, because I'm the boss, then people would assume that, oh, I need to respond to the boss straight away. So it's very easy, and I think often people are unaware of this. If I really want to work and I want to get all my emails cleared, I can always put a delay on. I write the email and then I just put a delay on when it's sent out, and it will be sent out at 9 o'clock the following morning. So I think it's very important for employers, leaders and managers to have some positive role modeling and demonstrating to their employees that they would support and encourage that work-life balance. And it's also the opposite also happens, where you have to be careful as a manager not to reward people who are exhibiting, they're working very late at night. not to hold those people up as role models. Oh, look at John, look at Jane, she was working, she sent me this email at 10 o'clock at night.
I see. Okay, so it's
I
kind of a
think that's
two-way
very
street.
important. Yeah, it's very, very important. And as colleagues as well, I think we have to be very clear about what our expectations are.
Okay. I completely agree. Absolutely. It sounds like I create the boundaries, and then we all kind of enforce those as a team or as a
collective. I think so. And I think I agree that's not easy to do. And in some organizational cultures, they've got a long way to go to achieve that. But I would hope that at some point we can all commit to ensuring that we each have that work-life balance and encouraging others to do the same. And I think role modeling is very, very important.
Absolutely. Showing someone who has the correct balance of this is what this should look like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So how would you say that COVID has affected work-life balance? Is COVID this chance to kind of reset our expectations regarding work-life balance, or do you think it's been really detrimental because working from home has kind of crossed that boundary for a lot of people?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Olivia. I think it's been kind of a double-edged sword, and COVID is what I would call a career shock. So a career shock. So a career shock is, and this is something that I've been doing quite a lot of research on recently. So a career shock is like an external factor which is beyond your control that has a direct impact on your career experiences and opportunities. So for example, as a career shock, many of us have been required to work from home. And we haven't really got much experience in that. Some managers haven't really had how do we manage people who are working from home? So I think at one level, the COVID pandemic has made many people sort of sit up and reevaluate their lives, identify what's really important to them. I think a lot of people have been looking around and saying, amidst all these challenges, I understand now that I've been giving way too much to my professional life, and they've got things into perspective. I want to spend more time with family and friends. I want to spend more time on hobbies and so forth. So I think for some people, it has changed the focus for them to say, I am going to work much harder on achieving that work-life balance. But I also do think that working from home has had a detrimental impact on people's lives in terms of opportunities for drawing those boundaries between work and non-work activities, simply because work has now gone home. Many people have been working from home for many years, salespeople, some academics and so forth, and creative writers and so forth. But for others, they've never worked from home. So what happens is it becomes much easier to sit down at your, there's nothing on TV. You think, oh, what should I do? Oh, I'll just pop and I'll just jump on the email. I'll just do a few emails. I'll finish off this report. Right? Then it's 10 o'clock at night and you're still there. Right? So I think that has created a problem. And I think also it's been difficult because people can't go out of their homes in many cases. So if you're working from home, but you could still go out for a drink with your friends, you could still go out for a bicycle ride. But because people have actually been confined to the home during the pandemic, then again, it's exacerbated the likelihood that they're going to continue working. And I think another thing, unfortunately, that has happened is people have become far more fearful about losing their jobs. We know many people have lost their jobs. And as a result of that, they've started saying, well, I've just got to work harder and longer and increase my targets, increase my outcomes so that I keep my job. So in a way, it's like a perfect storm. Lots of these things have come together to exacerbate opportunities for work-life balance.
Absolutely. I think many people would consider a work-life balance almost a privilege, especially when unemployment is growing because of COVID. So this idea I don't have the right to set boundaries because I'm just lucky to be here.
That's right. And I think, it's interesting. I was in a radio interview a while ago about this, and actually one person did call in and he said that he thought that anybody who's got a job should be willing to work as long as it takes because they should be grateful for the job. And I can sort of see where he's coming from, but fundamentally I don't agree with that, because I think it is everybody's business to ensure that we have life balance, regardless of the context, because otherwise we could use that excuse, we shouldn't really be working people so hard that we're making them sick. We really have a right. The real question is, do we have a right to a private life? And I would say, yes, we do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So what would you say about kind of this cultural work-life balance? Because in some cultures or countries, it's very common to have overworked people, and it's almost kind of a rite of passage, I would say, like Japan or the US, for instance, where 50 to 90 hour work weeks are
absolutely
more common, I would say.
Absolutely. And I think that's where it gets, there's a difference, I think, Olivia, between your organizational culture, where if you have an organizational culture that, they have excessive working hours, then I think the leader in the organization and the managers can make a big steps towards changing that organizational culture. But I think when it's a national culture, then I think it becomes much harder to try and manage and reduce. I know I worked in Japan for a number of years and observed, the very, very long hours that you're never switched off, expected to be available all the time. And so I think when it's a national culture in terms of longer work hours, then I think it's much harder to go against that. So I'm afraid I don't have any answers for that one. But on the other hand, I do think it's important for us to be mindful, and you've already, the fact that you raised this is important, that working hours are actually often culturally determined.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yes. I mean, you have the extreme of Japan where people are fall asleep on the job because they're so exhausted. And then you have places like France where more than 35 hours and it's an HR problem, and it's
That's right. And one could argue, and the French situation, I think, is an important one, because we also have to look at legal legislation, at government legislations, So, for example, here in Australia, the Victoria Police in the eastern states, they've actually just won a union rights that it's going to be put into their work contract that employees for the Victorian Police cannot be contacted outside of hours by their managers unless it is an emergency. So that's actually part of their union legislation now.
Wow.
And in the UK, for example, I know it's part of legislation that any employee has the right to ask for flexible work practices. They might not be given it, but the point is they do have the right to ask for it. So you have to look at legislation in a country to look at, the extent to which an employer can require you to work after hours. What is your maximum working week and so forth? So there are different legislative procedures in different countries and even in different industries.
Wow. So do you think that legislation is a good way to move forward in places, let's say like Japan, where it's a very cultural idea to do this? Would legislation be a good answer to kind of solve this problem?
I do. I think, today I've talked about how it's important for individuals to take ownership, take responsibility, and work with stakeholders to establish their own and achieve their own life balance. However, I recognize that in some instances that's just not possible, and it's somewhat naive to argue for that. So I think in many instances we have to have legislation. Preventing people from asking people, preventing employers, managers, leaders from, extending people's working days such that it has a detrimental impact on their psychological and physical well-being. So I think those legislative requirements can be an important safeguard.
It sounds like it's a multi-step or a multi kind of separate processes to kind of come together to make this happen.
It is. And I do think, Olivia, we're making progress. because I think the fact that, I can do a search and I get over 1,000 books on work-life balance. I mean, I'm sure if I'd have done that search 20 years ago, or perhaps even 10 years ago, would I have got as many hits? So I think the point now is that I think its profile, its importance socially, is gaining increasing recognition.
So it's kind of this growing trend that people are buying into.
It is. And so, for example, when I mentioned earlier the idea that amongst young people, young graduates, it's becoming an increasingly important criteria when they're looking for an employer. Perhaps their parents, and certainly for their grandparents, I suspect it possibly wasn't on their radars in terms of what they wanted from their careers. So as we get younger generations recognizing the value and attributing value to life balance, then I think that's going to be changing workplace cultures. And I think it's also going to be changing legislative requirements as well. So I'm hopeful that we are moving towards greater recognition of the importance of life balance.
Absolutely. It's very important. And speaking of students and new professionals, what would you say to those moving into the workforce, either very recently or soon, to what kind of habits would you suggest, or what kind of good advice could you have for those kinds of people who want a good work-life balance?
Okay. So I think my first suggestion would be, when you're on the job market, to do your investigation work and, take a look at a particular organization. And that might be looking at the length of hours, the demands of the job, and so forth. Oftentimes, initially, when we're trying to establish ourselves, I think we do have to be prepared perhaps to work longer, but we also have to look at what is the overall flavor of the organization, of the overall flavor of the industry. So, for example, some work I've done in the legal profession, we know that the legal profession, certainly when you're in training, that the hours are very long. So if the hours are very long and work-life balance is very important to you, and clearly, excuse me, the legal profession isn't for you. So when you're on the job market, it's important for you to do your due diligence. And then I think, when you get into an organization, it's important to demonstrate your commitment to the organization, that you are going to, commit to being a collegial employee who's going to make that contribution, but also, where possible, to take responsibility and achieve your own life balance, depending on how you want to define it. Drawing some boundaries and establishing, perhaps with your boss, with your clients, with your colleagues, about what you consider to be appropriate working hours. So, for example, not calling your clients or your colleagues over the weekend. Do you see what I mean? So it's about you being party to that.
So it's kind of you lead by example. It sounds like you create this boundary with other people, and then you kind of set the expectation that this is how I expect to be treated also.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, even if that means, having that delay on when you send that email out. The other thing is just little small things. I remember, I used to have this habit where I would take my cell phone to bed, and I would use my cell phone as my alarm clock. And then I realized I'd got into this nasty little habit of, I'll just check, I'm setting my alarm, and I'll just check my emails whilst I'm setting my alarm. Then I open an email, and then I've got an email buzzing around in my head. So I think that those little tactics you can do. Do I really need to look at my emails now? Will it make a difference if I look at it? Is there anything I can do about it now? No. I'll open it tomorrow morning when I'm ready. And even when you're in the workplace, establishing that I'm going to have a lunch, or I'm going to take a break, I'm going to leave work on time, and making a commitment to achieving that life balance.
Okay, so it's a very taking your own initiative in this. It is
I think so.
Up to you, kind of.
I think so. And it's about being aware, I'm sneaking off to my computer, or I'm looking at my emails, I'm texting my employees, I'm texting, and what kind of culture are you setting up, and what expectations are you setting up?
Absolutely. I think this is wonderful advice and very applicable to our audience specifically, but then also
Yeah.
anyone and everyone who's working.
Mm-hmm.
So this has
Mm-hmm.
been really great. Thank you very much for all of your
You're welcome.
advice. We appreciate it.
You're
Before we
welcome.
end today, how can people get in touch with you, follow your work?
Yeah, sure. So obviously I'm on LinkedIn and I'm here at Curtin University as well. And you can find me on the Curtin University website. Very happy to chat to people at any time.
Oh, amazing. Great. Okay. Thank you very much. And for anyone joining us, we will have more episodes for the Future Skills for Workplace Sustainability webinar, which you can find on our YouTube channel and Facebook Live. So thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you, Julia, for your presentation and your expertise. It's been very informative.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.